voice acting, I agree. So yeah, I mean, in terms of answering the question, yes, it is. But this is something I'm very into. I like the idea of breaking down Shakespeare and making it fun, so it's something that I'm happy to be doing now.
It is quite different from voiceover work. I love to entertain though, which is why I act. So it's kind of cool. I've always wanted to do educational comedy. So I'm happy I get to get people through school and make them not want to like rip up the pages of their book and eat them or whatever high schoolers do.
First of all, we don't have accents. You guys have accents. We don't. And second of all, yeah, I've been told I have the good old Chicago accent, which I can't really hear because I just talk normally. I don't know what it is to speak without this. This is normal for me. This is how everybody around me talks. This is how I talk. So, if I have an accent, let me live in this fantasy where I don't have one.
I wrote the Fortinbras play already. It is called Young Fortinbras, and it is a 10-page one-act play. I'm still sort of tinkering with it. I tried to get it produced at a contest, but it didn't get picked, and then I'm still looking at it and seeing if other people are interested in putting it on or whatever. In terms of reading it on Pursued by a Bear or presenting it in some way, plans for that are still being worked out. As you can probably tell from my technical setup, I don't have a great technical setup in terms of filming a play or anything that's happening, so we'll see about that. But yes, Young Fortinbras, I worked on. The Iago play is sort of still on the starting block, but I'm thinking a lot about it. I'm thinking about replacing it with a different play that's sort of been in my head ever since The Hollow Crown about Prince Hal, but I promise absolutely nothing on that front. But if the Iago play doesn't happen at all, it'll be because of that one. I don't know, Jesse, were we ever on the same show together? Not extensively, to be sure, but yeah, this was pretty much the beginning, as far as I can recall, for any of our collaborations.
I was on a machinima called Star Trek the Quasi-Machinima with a bunch of people that would eventually form Geekwing.net, and also with Inertia666 and Nixie Pixel from YouTube. Those two are awesome. But yeah, that was my recent project before this one.
Condensed Shakespeare and Adolescence. That's an ongoing project that I've been working pretty hard on, getting taller.
I started really liking Shakespeare when I was 13, when I was in 8th grade, and I started reading Julius Caesar on my own. At that point, I think I had already read one Shakespeare play in class, but that was the one that I really read by myself and got into it independently, and that's the year I started watching Shakespeare at the New Jersey Shakespeare Theater. The next year my family got season tickets and we just went crazy and just started watching all the Shakespeare, and it was so great. And by the time I was like 15, 16, I was the Shakespeare nut, and I've never stopped being the Shakespeare nut.
I got drafted into a production of Romeo and Juliet.
It started with poetry. I've always been a huge poetry buff. Loved it, loved it, loved it. So one year for Christmas or Hanukkah, one of the two, my mom bought me a copy of Shakespeare's sonnets, and I got to reading them. At first, the attraction to Shakespeare's writing was purely topical, and by saying that, I mean I enjoyed it for the way the words felt coming off my tongue. The flow, the music of it, the iambic pentameter, the way it fit to my heartbeat. I enjoyed that so much that I just kept reading it and reading it and reading it until my comprehension level grew to a point where I began to enjoy it and be attracted to his words in a deeper way, where I would appreciate his meaning as opposed to just simply the way the words sounded. And it all, it took off from there. I started reading more by him, not just poetry, but his plays, and I started performing his plays, and I started watching performances of his plays and becoming very critical of the way his plays were done. And that's really how I started loving Shakespeare. I don't just like it, I love it.
I found a copy of Hamlet when I was 5 and I used it to abuse my peers, and then I started acting out the lines on stage when I was 7.
Sharky might be the best one to answer this question since I'm sort of a newcomer.
You should ask Sharky this question in particular, but the two of us started it together. It was Sharky's idea. He's the one who sort of geared it all up and got the infrastructure up and running and made it happen. And then he recruited pretty much everybody else. Between the two of us, we've been able to like meet people and find people, but he's done most of that. So that's how PBAB started, and how it exists in its current form today is mostly through his efforts, really.
Well, I've already been talking to Cassius for a while, and I said, hey, want to do a Shakespeare show with me? And she said yes, and here we are.
Sharky and Cassius that sort of kicked off the whole thing. Sharky was the one who recruited me. He offered me a chance to be a part of this, and I jumped. I just jumped.
I am obsessed with Jane Eyre, to the point where I've written my own 140,000 word novel based on it. So Sharky was my Facebook friend, and one day he said, oh man, so many Jane Eyres to review. And I was like, oh my god, if you need help, let me know, because I can help, I have opinions. And he let me do a whole review.
So Sharky came up with Pursued by a Bear, and I helped found it. And basically Sharky recruited pretty much everybody else. I helped recruit Mary because she was in a production of mine at school.
We were all recruited as part of the Bear Initiative.
I had no real choice since I started it. Yeah.
I joined Pursued by a Bear at the beginning with Sharky. It was his idea, and I sort of jumped on board because it sounded like it would be fun, and as it turns out, it has been fun, and still is.
I have such a deep love for reviewing, reading, and analyzing Shakespeare, and in general, old movies that play off of Shakespeare's key bones for a storyline, such as Romeo and Juliet being used for West Side Story, or for The Taming of the Shrew being turned into 10 Things I Hate About You, which is, I just love that. I think that's so clever, and I think that's a great way to keep Shakespeare from becoming this old, dull, listless, never paid attention to kind of genre of writing. And I realize that Shakespeare is an author. He's not exactly a genre of writing, but he forever changed writing, so he deserves his own little cubbyhole in the grand scheme of authors, etc.
They bribed me with chocolate and kittens.
Old enough to have been reading Shakespeare for over 10 years.
Well, I'm as old as my tongue, and a little bit older than my teeth.
Ah, well, you see, it's interesting that you ask because, sevens, throw a square root, and those are fun. Quadratics, and, yeah, that many.
Look! It's a little man jumping on a trampoline.
I live in a state of perpetual curiosity and wild ambition, aka somewhere in the Midwest.
I live in the state of Shakespeare.
Well, I started off at a very base state, then I moved on to a bit of an elect state, and a bit of a fire state, then a magnet state, then that double rocket state phase. That was odd. Right now I'm in a bit of a cosmic state.
To answer that question, I'm going to use my handy-dandy cipher. Read along at home. W, C, G, L, N, V, J, G, Q, O, A, W.
Nah, I live in New York. I'll cop to that, pretty much because I think I've mentioned it a few times. I mean, it's the place to be for Shakespeare, and I recommend that everybody be in New York at all times.
Who am I? Who am I? Howard Stark? Tony Stark? Captain America!
Recently, I've been rereading Les Mis and Good Omens, but I also just finished Lolita, and that was an interesting experience.
I've been pretty obsessed with George R.R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire series this summer. I really wanted to catch up in the TV series, and then as soon as I got done reading book 2, I was so enveloped in the storyline that I just kept on with book 3.
The last 5 books I read were Mansfield Park by Jane Austen, Villette by Charlotte Bronte, and the 50 Shades trilogy by E.L. James, which was disappointing because I totally read 50 Shades for the hamster quote that was going around the internet, and it turned out to be fake. And right now I'm reading Thief of Time by Terry Pratchett and Monster High by Lucy Harrington.
I'm in the middle of a Julius Caesar book right now called Death of Kings, actually, the book 2 in the series of 4.
Hamlet's Perfection, The Seas of Majesty, and Welcome to the Real World by Angela Malick. That one's really good.
I was one of the beta testers to get onto Pottermore. Yeah, fat lot of good that did me, staying up until midnight to get onto a site and try and find the magical quill. Yeah, that was very pointless.
Nope, no Pottermore for me. I learned that you had to find a quill or something. There was actual work involved, and I was like, screw this, I'm going outside.
But it's certainly something I can talk about for future generations, you know, when our grandchildren are born and we finally get to open the Deathly Hallows section of Pottermore.
I do not have a Pottermore account, so sorry to disappoint. I am a big Harry Potter fan, 100%, definitely, but I'm cool. I'm cool without a Pottermore account.
Anyway, so I took the test. I'm a Gryffindor, which is great because
Yes, I do, and I am in House Ravenclaw.
I just love Gryffindor, and I love the colors, and it's just my favorite. It's always been like the best house.
Really?
What do you mean? African or European swallow?
I like musicals more than straight plays, so my recommendation right now is Book of Mormon on Broadway.
I'm gonna go the easy route on this one and say The Spanish Tragedy by Thomas Kidd and Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. They're the 2 plays that I directed that are not Shakespeare, and The Spanish Tragedy is basically Hamlet, but more so. It's if Hamlet were really a revenge play, it would be The Spanish Tragedy. The Spanish Tragedy was written about 15 years before Hamlet, and Shakespeare pretty much ripped it off entirely. It's kind of epic, and it's really brutal and really interesting, and the characters in it are very intense, and I loved them, and that's why I sort of went with the plot of it as well, which is totally off the hook, and I love it so much.
I'm a huge fan of Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller. I have both of their books of their entire collection of works.
Our Town, Raisin in the Sun, and Clybourne Park.
And also, not just as a theater thing, but as a life experience. I think everyone should see the Lion King stage show before they die.
And Oedipus Rex, of course, a little bit more famous than The Spanish Tragedy. The reason why I really, really love it is because not only is the story just classic and amazing, and these characters are just put in these incredible situations, but it's basically the birth of dramatic irony. Sophocles really goes right up to the edge of what it should be okay to do with dramatic irony and just hits this fantastic stride with it. And that is what just every time when I read it, my mind is blown again.
12 Angry Men, The Spanish Tragedy, and Holy Musical Batman.
One that I just really like right now, since we all just got done watching Hollow Crown, is Falstaff being a 12-year-old girl and saying, "Do thou amend thy face, and I'll amend my life!"
He that hath a beard is more than a youth, and he that hath no beard is less than a man. And he that is more than a youth is not for me, and he that is less than a man, I am not for him.
Hic et ubique from Hamlet. It's actually on the placard on my ship that I play on Star Trek Online.
My favorite Shakespeare quote is all of Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 1.
I'm not going to answer that question because asking my favorite Shakespeare quote is like asking my favorite word in the English language. They're all great for different things. I use them in all different types of situations, and there's no one word that I can be like, oh, that's the best word, that's the best quote. I mean, for different purposes, you're going to use different ones. I mean, the big, you know, speech opening lines tend to be very epic, but it's not like you're going to be saying them all the time. You've got the really beautiful rhapsodic ones, which again are great, but not something you might use every day. But then you have the really practical ones, which are great too. So you can't really say that any particular one is the best. I mean, each one's got its own situations that you're going to want to use them for. A lot of characters are very interesting, but of course a lot of them come with a lot of trauma and potential murder and or other form of death. So I'm gonna go with Beatrice on this one.
Mercutio from Romeo and Juliet and Beatrice.
We could talk about guys and it'd be fun, and yeah, Beatrice.
We could braid each other's hair and talk about boys and paint our nails.
I would really love to have like a 3-girl slumber party between me, Beatrice from Much Ado About Nothing, and Katherine from The Taming of the Shrew. Because I think Beatrice and Katherine are essentially, they have some of the same characteristics, where they're both very snarky, they're both very sassy and witty, and I have that quality too.
Rosalind from As You Like It. She seems cool.
Love's Labor's Lost. That play is dumb with a capital ridiculous.
Timon of Athens. It's the story of Puff the Magic Dragon, except instead of Puff, it's Timon, and instead of Little Jackie Paper, it's all Timon's friends. He literally dies of sorrow alone in a cave.
I have to say Two Gentlemen of Verona, because the characters are so unlikable and the plot is so stupid and it's just hard to get into. I can't say that like you could never do it well, but I really don't like it. I mean, the protagonist is just so... Proteus, he sucks.
The Merchant of Venice. Shakespeare can do intersecting stories really well, like say King Lear, that was great. He does not pull it off too well in Merchant of Venice. It's just different stories that he merged into one play and they barely connect, and even when they do, they feel really forced, especially the ring scene.
I don't like Romeo and Juliet. I think it's the weakest of all his plays that he's written. Shakespeare's writings are so rich and so powerful. I don't think that Romeo and Juliet have quite met that caliber. I mean, as far as popularity standards go, that has got to be the most popular play that he's ever written, at least in the modern media. The spins that they put on it, you know, they play off of that so many times because it is a very common theme of star-crossed lovers, love that cannot be. So I understand why it's popular, but I don't like Romeo. I don't especially like Juliet. I don't like that play as a whole, and it's not so much that I hate it, it's just that I've seen and I've read and experienced so many more of Shakespeare's plays. I just don't understand why someone would prefer something that's so weak like that as opposed to something that's so strong as like Hamlet or, you know, Othello, something like that. I'm talking about comparatively, it has probably got to be the worst.
Iago from Othello. He's a prick.
Iago, I just don't like him. He seems to be a truly and deeply huge jerk. He's just a huge jerk. I didn't like him at all, and I think he's pretty slimy and pretty evil.
Iago, he is so evil. Oh my god. And he's evil without a clear motivation. Like, you can see why the events in his life have made him so bitter. Like, you can see how they've made him that bitter, but it's hard to really understand what is up his ass. I mean, he's so immoral. He just wants to destroy. He is so viciously jealous, and he's so intelligent, and he's so able to play people, and he's so cold about it that it's very shocking. A lot of other villains are much more specifically motivated. They have a specific thing they're trying to get, like the crown or something, or they have a specific grievance, and he doesn't really. He has a lot of general grievances and a lot of hate, but it's because of this kind of fuzzy goal of his that makes him the most upsetting villain to me.
Aaron from Titus Andronicus, of course. I mean, look at his bloody resume, and yeah, I'm using bloody as both an intensifier and an adjective in that sentence.
Aaron! Dude, he turns to the nurse that just delivered his child and says, "Go to the Empress. Tell her this I said." And he kills her, and oh, he's the best.
Well, if you look at textual evidence, he has to be in his early 30s, but I always thought that was super duper creepy when you factor in Ophelia, so he's always been about 18 or 19 in my mind.
Personally, I think that he's on the younger side of the scale because he kind of acts throughout the play like this spitfire teenager. And then at times he has this maturity that's beyond his years. But, you know, it seems more like he's this brooding teenager with rash decisions. So overall, I don't think he's old as 30. Not saying that 30 is old, but I don't think he's as old as 30. I don't know if he's as young as 16, but I would say he's closer to 16 than 30.
I think that the play obviously can be read either way. It doesn't hurt you to use either one. My headcanon is that he's 16, and for my Fortinbras play, which based on how these answers are going to be ordered, I'm either about to talk about or have talked about already in my play about Fortinbras, I make Hamlet 16. He's not in the play, but the math only works out if Hamlet's 16, not 30, because Fortinbras is 18 in this, and, you know, based on, you know, when the battle took place where his father died, you know, Hamlet would have to be 16, not 30. So, yeah, I think that he's probably 16. I think that the play is slightly more satisfying if he's 16. I think it makes a little bit more sense if he's 16, but him being 30 doesn't shoot any holes in it either, really. But I do think that it makes more sense that that Hamlet would not have become king upon his father's death if he's 16 years old. I think that his issues with his mother make more sense if he's 16 years old, and I think that the relationship with Ophelia makes more sense if he's 16 years old. So ultimately, when I think of the play, when I think of the character in my head, I think of him as 16.
30, because it would be in line with the way Shakespeare tries to pair up certain people, like Paris and Juliet. That's also that much of an age difference. So yeah, 30 would be in line with how Shakespeare writes in some cases.
I was Lady Macbeth in my school's production of Macbeth. That was the only time my school ever did anything involving Shakespeare on stage, because really I don't think they were very fond of anything classical or beyond a 4th grade reading level.
You know what? Tragedy. Even though I was a theater major and have been on stage pretty constantly since I was 8 and have loved Shakespeare since I was 11, I've done hardly any Shakespeare, just minor roles and short scenes. The biggest Shakespeare involvement I had was my senior year of high school, directing and producing Romeo and Juliet. That's the program of it framed back there. And it was wonderful.
All right, let's do this. Freshman year, freshman spring, I was Curio in 12th Night. Then I directed 3 scene exhibitions where I cut together different scenes with a theme, and I directed those. Some Valentine's Day, some Halloweens. We had some scary stuff, we had some romantic stuff, that was fun. So then my sophomore year was filled with those scene exhibitions.
As far as being in the crew goes, I was the fight choreographer for Romeo and Juliet, and most recent one was me doing lighting for A Midsummer Night's Dream.
My junior year, I directed Richard II, and I was also Lord Bagot, and that was an all-female cast, so that was really an interesting, really wonderful experience there. And then after that, I directed The Spanish Tragedy, which is not Shakespeare, but Shakespeare contemporary, and that was pretty epic, and I played the Viceroy of Portugal in that. After that, I was the Provost in Measure for Measure, my senior year. I also produced a production of Pericles. I produced that Measure for Measure, assistant produced for publicity, and I think that's it. I don't think I've been involved in any other Shakespeare plays. Came close.
I have been Ariel from The Tempest, Helena from Midsummer Night's Dream, Hermione from Winter's Tale, Lady Macbeth from Macbeth, Portia from Merchant of Venice, Rosalind from As You Like It, and Hamlet from Pericles.
Oh, oh, how could I forget Hamlet? My sophomore year, right before I directed Richard II, I was assistant stage manager, prop mistress, and light operator for Hamlet. So that was what got me really into it.
The last Shakespeare role I played was John of Gaunt, who has one of the longest sentences in theater history. Therefore, I am going to complain about Shakespeare's long sentences. Here's Romeo. One sentence. "O speak again, bright angel, for thou art as glorious to this night, being o'er my head, as is a winged messenger of heaven unto the white upturned wondering eyes of mortals that fall back to gaze on him when he bestrides the lazy pace in clouds and sails upon the bosom of the air."
When I got started doing Shakespeare's works as an actual performer, I found that it was most difficult to capture the fluidity of his lines, of his words. And I'm not just saying that you have to understand how fluid it is, but you have to make it sound as if you were just talking. Because, I mean, this is not the way everybody talks anymore. Everybody talks differently now. But that's the thing. That's the thing about performing Shakespeare. You have to take it and you have to make it sound like this is how I talk every day. And that's pretty much the hardest part.
I think the most difficult thing is the balance between using the verse to your advantage and speaking the verse as if you're actually talking. I think there's a great disparity between these two strategies, as if like you can only do one or the other, and you have like the really old school, like all the movies that are like really old that are about Shakespeare plays, you know, you're gonna see people singing the verse and it's gonna be really over the top and operatic and very unnatural, and then you're gonna get people who try to wrench the verse into a modern tone and a modern sound, and that's gonna sound terrible as well. You're gonna lose a lot of the beauty and the, you know, intriguing parts of the language itself. And I think there's a balance to this. I think that, yeah, you know, there's all this great stuff in there, and then you want to speak it as if this is how your character speaks. If you've got a lot of rhyming couplets, that's how your character talks, and speak it as if it's natural for them. You don't want to go up there and be like, I'm basically singing this song, but you know, your character could be really smart and intense, or just, you know, it informs the tone of the scene and everything, but it doesn't have to make you sound ridiculous. On the other hand, you don't want to go through and specifically say, okay, I'm gonna sound really modern with this, and I'm gonna, you know, try and use a very modern dialect, because then you're changing your character. You're not actually being the person that's on the page. So I think that once you've learned that, that's sort of the key step of how to sound good doing Shakespeare. But up until that point, Shakespeare is pretty hard.
Not dying on stage. It's surprisingly difficult, but I've been rather skilled at it so far. I think if I just stopped being in Hamlet productions, my near-death experiences would go down a lot.
Not getting killed, which is more difficult than it sounds.
My first role was Ariel in The Tempest, but hey, Sharky, what was your first Shakespearean role again?
That was Romeo in Romeo and Juliet. It's really fun when you share a bed scene with your Juliet and her parents are front and center on opening night. No pressure, not at all. That was fun.
My first Shakespearean role was the role of Curio in Twelfth Night, my freshman year of college. I had 4 lines. It was great. Will you go hunt, my lord? Etc.
I was actually cast as Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream back in 6th grade honors English. We were going through sort of an abridged version, kid-friendly version of Midsummer Night's Dream, and they were handing out roles, and I kind of just shot my hand up, and I didn't really know who I was getting into, but I ended up being Helena, and I actually really liked her.
Lady Macbeth in an 8th grade hand puppet show.
Romeo. Oh, I love a woman. Wait, I don't love her. I love someone else. I've never been in love. Blah, 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 blah. Shut up and stop whining. Oh my god. I hated him so much. Even when it was like cool to like Romeo and Juliet as like a little kid, I thought it was the most stupid thing I've ever heard, because that is just so dumb, and he does not even fit the bill for a hero in Shakespearean standards. I would rather date, oh god, I'd rather date Iago, and I hate Iago. I would rather date a villain than Romeo. The only thing I have to say about Romeo is that I hope he was a good kisser, because that's got to be the only thing that would make up for such an amazing whining ability.
Second soldier in Coriolanus.
Posthumous Leonatus from Cymbeline. Dude's an idiot. Everyone else in the play says he's awesome, but he's an idiot. He's like Johnny from The Room, really. Lots of unwarranted praise.
I want to say Posthumous from Cymbeline, but I can't. He breaks very spectacularly in ways that are just mind-boggling, but he does have a lot of pressure put on him. He actually has reason to be as disturbed as he is. Now, Proteus from Two Gentlemen of Verona is the weakest male character because he breaks not quite as spectacularly as Posthumous, though very close, and he does it for no reason at all. So, yeah, gotta go with Proteus on this one.
For me, weakest character is a two-way tie between Posthumous from Cymbeline and Proteus from Two Gentlemen of Verona. Like, if you're dating someone and his name starts with a P and ends with us, just break it off now.
Mako from Legend of Korra. They could have done like a lot better with him. I think it was maybe because it was rushed because they thought they only had one season, but like... Oh, are we talking about Shakespeare?
Beatrice, 100%. She's got some really fun feminist stuff in there as well, besides just being a really fun comic heroine. She actually talks about, different types of men not being for her. She talks to her cousin about how she should pick a man that she likes, not just listen to her father. So she actually is a little bit subversive and interesting and really smart, and because of this, I think that she is absolutely the strongest female character. Even when her emotions get the better of her, it isn't portrayed in that kind of mean or destructive way. So I think that she is portrayed in a way to really set her up to be the strongest character in herself, and I love her so much.
Lady Macbeth is the strongest female character.
It's a tie between Rosalind, Beatrice, and Viola.
I would say that even with her suicide in the end, she was still by far and away the strongest female character that Shakespeare's ever written. Because I think her ambition, her drive, her ingenuity have put her in such a position to be the force behind Macbeth.
Lady Macbeth.
Lady Macbeth. She gets things done.
Top! Katara! Rainbow Dash! Are we still talking about Shakespeare?
Rosalind from As You Like It. I think I've said that before.
Henry V. And not because of Tom Hiddleston, it's because I'm into superheroes. And Henry V is, I think, the closest Shakespeare ever got to writing a superhero.
I absolutely love Katherine from The Taming of the Shrew, so much so that I took her name as my name.
Toss-up between Cassius and Richard II. It's hard to compare them because Richard II is such a domineering protagonist and Cassius, of course, is not. It's a bit of a coin flip, but I'll probably have to give it to Richard on this one. I love the play, I love his place in it, I think he's an incredibly interesting character, and there's a reason why that's the play I directed. So yeah, gonna go with R2.
I just love her sass, her smart humor. She's got such a tongue on her. It is so great because, she will not take anything from anybody and she'll dish it right back. She will not take an unrequited hit from anyone. And she doesn't believe that she needs anyone but herself, despite what society thinks, despite what her family thinks, despite what everybody else thinks. And that is what makes her just such a great character. I think she's very well-rounded and I really relate to her.
Iachimo from Cymbeline. I know he's a total creeper, but just
Okay, I'm going to do King Lear. Best King Lear, the 2008 one, directed by Trevor Nunn, starring Ian McKellen.
Best film adaptation, in my opinion, of a Shakespearean play is the 1993 production of Much Ado About Nothing, and it isn't just because it has a world-class selection of actors, and I mean like Emma Thompson, who's fabulous, Michael Keaton, Keanu Reeves, Denzel Washington, and Kate Beckinsale, and I mean those are some of the big name actors, but even the little relatively unknown actors, they did a fantastic job portraying the roles that Shakespeare cut out. I really enjoyed that rendition of Much Ado About Nothing. It was very true to the actual play. And also, I enjoyed how rich the interpretation was because it was so full of emotion, so full of humor, and it was so refreshing because it's one thing to read these words and have a little chuckle, and it's another thing entirely to just see something and just think, wow, so this is how it's supposed to be said, and it's so much funnier to see it acted out as opposed to reading it.
Worst is the Peter Brook one from 1971. If you want to know why I hate it, the whole movie is on YouTube. Click on it and just watch the first 5 minutes. It will become obvious quickly. The whole thing is like that.
The worst film adaptation of a Shakespearean play has got to be Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. Now, in case you don't recognize the name Baz Luhrmann, you might recognize the name of the person who played Romeo, which is teenage dreamboat Leonardo DiCaprio. And I love him to death, but I hated that movie. Ugh, it was absolutely terrible. I mean, I've got to commend the producers for the continuity of the modernness that they put on the classical tale. Like, that was very smooth, that was very fluid, and I think that was very well done. But the movie in and of itself was shaky. I didn't like how they pieced it together. I didn't like the spin on it, and I did not like Claire Danes as Juliet. I just cannot get my head around it. I can't absorb it. I can't.
The best adaptation of a play that involves the original text. I think it's a very different game if you're doing something like 10 Things I Hate About You, where it's like based on Shakespeare, but clearly a modern story in a totally different setting with new language. That's key. I think that's a different thing, and I don't really want to compare stories like that with the original text. Now, if you're stuck with the original text movies, I have to say the best adaptation I've ever seen is Ralph Fiennes' Coriolanus from last year. I was really blown away by it. I was surprised at how much of a movie it was, how well thought out the modern analogies were. There was almost nothing that faltered in the translation of the story to the new time period, even while the language all stayed the same. I thought it was really, really well done, and no trace at all of we'd rather be doing this on a stage, which, as great as the movies like Kenneth Branagh's Much Ado About Nothing and Julie Taymor's Titus are, there are definitely shades of perhaps film might not be the medium that everyone wants to be working in, whereas Ralph Fiennes' Coriolanus is a movie through and through, and it's also good. I mean, there are other movies that are clearly movies that suck, like Ethan Hawke's Hamlet, yay, but that Coriolanus movie was fantastic. As for worst Shakespeare adaptations, I have to go with, in terms of ones I've seen all the way through, I really do have to go with the 1982 Romeo and Juliet. It's bad, people. It's really bad. It's so terrible.
Favorite adaptation would be Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet. That's 4 hours, 2 minutes, and 13 seconds of glorious uncut Hamlet right there. And my least favorite would have to be Feral Media's Richard II. That one was painful.
My favorite film adaptation is Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet because it's the full thing and he actually adds bits with the flashbacks and everything. The worst by far is the 1982 Romeo and Juliet because of tights, among other things.
I have to say, my school's production of Macbeth, it was awful. The sets were bad, the props were bad, I was the only actor on stage that was doing a Scottish accent. And I mean, I wasn't even doing a Scottish accent, I was doing something close to a Scottish accent, but nobody else even attempted. So it was really bad. We got a really terrible turnout too. Nobody wanted to come see it. So I know that isn't technically me attending it, but I have to say that's the worst thing I've ever seen done to a Shakespearean play. It was almost blasphemous.
I haven't attended as many as everyone else on PBAB, but the ones I saw were either really good or tolerable.
I can't really say that I've seen god-awful Shakespeare. I've seen some dull Shakespeare. That's really the worst I've seen. I've seen god-awful Marlowe, but that's just because it wasn't to my liking. I was pretty horrified. But other than that, no. I mean, I've just seen like dull or disappointing Shakespeare, so it's hard to really say, oh, there's this one that was really terrible. Nothing's coming to mind, fortunately.
I saw an outdoors performance of The Winter's Tale recently, and it was all different levels of terrible. The aunties had an Austin Powers accent, and the audience kept laughing, and Winter's Tale is not a comedy, and it's like, you see that cute little kid on stage? Well, you better not get used to him being there.
How now? Though yet acquaintance be but new, and madness lacking method, I confess, here writ find numerals precious, all mine own. Good night, sweet prince, and call me maybe, yes?
Oh man, I don't really use Shakespearean pickup lines only because usually when I mention that I like Shakespeare, guys often run in the opposite direction. I love it when Rosalind in As You Like It said, "Come, woo me, for I am in a holiday humor and am like enough to consent."
Don't try to pick me up using a Shakespeare line. No, don't do it. Because the context inevitably sucks. No, don't do it. Seriously, stop. No, because I know that everybody ends up dead.
Then move not, while my prayer's effect I take. Thus from my lips, by yours, my sin is purged.
I can't believe I still remember that.
Okay, wait. Let me my tender service to your lips. Not that I use that, ever. Boys are dumb.
Wow, that's not oddly specific. Did these questions come from Tumblr by any chance? As for Tom Hiddleston, I think that it's pretty obvious to say Hamlet, because, you know, once you play Henry V, you kind of have to play Hamlet, but I think it's actually a really good fit for what he's been doing in Shakespeare, because he's got the, like, young, but kind of edgy and kind of intense thing down. So I think Hamlet's a good choice for him, besides the fact that it's just sort of like the trajectory. You know, once you've done Henry V, it's like, oh yeah, you should do Hamlet. But I think it actually particularly makes sense. So if I could make that happen, I certainly would.
Ideally, one where he would be shirtless all the time.
Edgar in Lear, with Chris Hemsworth as Edmund and Anthony Hopkins as Gloucester. Because then it would be Thor, but Tom Hiddleston would win.
I think I could see him doing very well as Caliban in The Tempest. He's kind of got that sort of bravado that Caliban has, and I think that he could do that very well because he does sort of have that arrogant kind of, not swagger, so to speak, but he's got that drunkenness, kind of a drunk on arrogance feel when he played Loki in The Avengers and Thor. So I think he could do that very well.
The bear from Winter's Tale. I think he can bring a lot to the character, really. It'll be fascinating to watch.
Every Shakespearean villain ever plus Mercutio and Hamlet, because can you imagine that just
Arthur X Gravity from King John. Seriously, OTP all the way.
Imogen and the Headless Body of Cloten.
I've always been a huge shipper of Mercutio and Gromio because I think it's not so much a bro TP, because I mean, Shakespeare had a ton of bro TPs in his works. I mean, you can go through any play and you'll find a bro TP. Like, seriously, he has bros from here to Kingdom Come. But I don't think that's the case. I like Mercutio and I like Romeo together.
Hamlet and Horatio, five ever, Horlet, or Hamatio? That is the question.
So I've recently been informed that canon pairings don't count, and I'm pretty boring. I like a lot of canon pairings, and in Shakespeare I haven't been that adventurous with my pairing of characters together just because I so like just what the plays give me. I don't really feel too much of a need to romantically pair people off. I like backstories, but not so much, you know, using the characters as they exist in their current timeline to, you know, touch each other, as it were. But I have to say, OTP that is not a canon pairing is Brutus Cassius. Oh my god, I mean, they're such a couple. That's like not even a joke. And I think that it's really interesting how they interact and everything, and I think it would be great. So yeah, Brutus Cassius is my OTP.
It's definitely an option.
There are no plans at the moment to review Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, the play, or any film adaptations of it or anything, but it's certainly in our sphere, so it's not off the table. It's just that we haven't really looked at it yet, and since we've done a lot of Hamlet, I'm not sure how soon we're going to be coming back to Hamlet-related things, but it's certainly something that we could look at and could be of interest to our future endeavors.
Yes, Coriolanus.
Yes, I have. I think it's awesome. And King Lear.
I have heard about it. I've heard really good things about it. I wanted to go see it for the longest time, but I haven't had a chance to.
Have I seen the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged by the Reduced Shakespeare Company? Don't insult me. Don't insult me. Seriously, seriously. Have I seen it? I will answer with this. From Tybalt's death onward, the lovers are cursed. Despite the best efforts of friar and nurse, their fate pursues them, they can't seem to duck it, and by the end of Act 5, they both kick the bucket. Yes, I have seen it live a few times, I've seen the DVD several times, listened to every single commentary on it. I'm a fan. Have I at some point actually memorized the entire Othello rap? Yes, I have.
Alas, not yet, but I did see their reduced Hamlet, and that was wondrous.
I am the Austen character, you don't understand. That scholarly, takes himself slightly too seriously, kind of lunatic, that's me. I am that person. So do I like them? Yes.
Ah, and there's a reason for that. What you see here is not an actual human, I'm just really good at animation.
Oh, stop.
No idea what you're talking about.
I'm not sure about everyone else, but for me, it's all because of Adobe Creative Suite 5.5. You think this is bad? It's worse without the effects. So much worse.
I have to assume that when Sharky uploads pictures of me to Pursued by a Bear, he uses some like extreme Photoshop tool that turns this mess into something that's somewhat presentable to the public.
Okay, well that requires a bit of a stipulation that we are, in which case, thank you if you believe that. In terms of how, I don't really know what to say for that beyond thanking my parents for the genes, I guess. And I mean, all I do before I go to film is a bit of makeup, so I, you know, don't look too vampiric. Who knows how that works. I'm pretty pale, and I don't really go out during the day.
This is my favorite question.
We're awesome, thank you. We try. We're gonna keep going, we're gonna keep trying.
Well, that's not a question, but thank you! Golly, my stars!
And I love you, random citizen.
Stop! This is for an educational site! Ah! This is nice. Did you used to do that when you were a kid? You just yell in the fan and go, I sound like a robot. This is how fans talk. This is for an educational site. I never thought I would grow up and this is what my life has come to. Yelling in fans. I'm not complaining.